Hello, this is Trevor Lang, director of the motion picture Skyfall, or the original director, I should say, before I was replaced by my colleague Sir Sam Mendes. Thanks to the good people at MGM Studios, in collaboration with the Scottish Prison Service, I have been granted temporary parole to record this special director's commentary, which I believe will be on the new 4K edition. A little bit out of focus, this opening shot. I will cop to that. Still getting my sea legs, if I'm honest. This was the first day of filming. People said that I was crazy for wanting to shoot the entire film chronologically, but it is much better for the actors. And also, there wasn't a script, so I couldn't jump around, even if I wanted to. All I had was a napkin that I'd shown to the Broccolis that said, in all caps, "Spy movie?" ? And the Broccolis, thankfully, were excited enough by that to get the ball rolling, and we worked out the rest of the details on the fly. So when we shot this opening set piece in Istanbul, we were really launching ourselves into the unknown. Before we go any further, though, let's talk about Danny Craig here, magnificent actor. First day on set, I was a little nervous to meet Danny. We'd only met once, briefly, at the Broccoli house before we were on the opposite ends of the camera here. So, just before the first take, I decided to corner him on the way back from the Lavies, and I pushed him against the wall, and I said to him, "Look, you, I appreciate you don't know me from Adam. All my previous films are centered around the teen beach party genre. It's true. I know it looks like I got this job purely because I roll with the Broccolis. But trust me, I know my shit, and I know you know your shit. So I just want to reassure you that this is going to be a fun, collaborative set. We are going to have a really, really good time telling this story together. Whatever story that might turn out to be. Who knows at this point, eh? Not only that, though, but I promise you, the next 133 days is basically going to be the coolest, craziest holiday either of us has ever been on. And if you want to get into some shit while we're out here, we can get into some shit, you know? Because I am a fucking wild man when I get off the leash. All you have to do is say the word, and we can off-road, if you know what I'm saying. You and me, if you want, we can go to the dark side. If you want to get in Willy Wonka's great glass elevator, I can make that happen. You want to forget who you are out here? I can make that happen, man. We can get into some real trouble out here. Like 2 years of therapy just to re-establish a stable emotional baseline kind of trouble. At any point, just say the word, yeah? And you and me, we are out on the town, fucking beast mode. Do you understand? Anyway, I looked deep into those beautiful eyes of his, and I said that to him. And Danny didn't say anything back in return, which is kind of his style. He's a cool customer. He just nodded. Nothing too demonstrative, but through that, I knew that that was his way of saying, absolutely. You go for it, Trev. If you lead, I will follow. And I've got to say, that instant support from Dan, that reassurance, really did give me the confidence to really go for it out there. Take bigger and bigger risks, both in relation to the film and, of course, the other stuff. And obviously there were terrible consequences to some of the things that I did over those 133 days. Things that destroyed my career and put me in prison and will likely haunt me for the rest of my days. But nevertheless, I will never forget that first proper conversation with Dan at the start of this whole journey where he put his trust in me. He instantly saw my passion, my honesty, my drive to explore the limits of human consciousness, and he empowered that. And that meant so much to me. And I'm not trying to say that it was Danny's fault for encouraging me. Not at all. I take full responsibility for everything that went wrong out there. It was all me. None of that had anything to do with Daniel Craig. And you know what? There is actually a very good possibility that I wasn't talking to Daniel Craig at all, and that, in actual fact, I'd cornered his stunt double, David, who's from Gdansk and only speaks perfunctory English. This is fourth language, after all. So if that's the case, then I guarantee he didn't understand a single word I was saying. Nevertheless, I felt empowered. This is quite a long action sequence, isn't it? You know, first the Range Rovers, then the motorbikes, now on a train. If you think it's too long to watch, imagine how long it took to shoot the f***ing thing.
Here. What's going on?
I'm still with them. Give me CCTV.
Hated every second of this. Oh, except this day, actually. We had these amazing chicken baguettes for lunch. I actually remember Craig saying to me, I like chicken. Now, this day was feta flatbreads, I think. Sushi lunch this day. This was a kind of dal, I think. Can't remember that day. That one's moussaka. That's tuna pasta. Oh, pizza rolls. They were awful. The day we squibbed Craig was a mushroom risotto, I think. From some kind of grain with cottage cheese. It was quite forgettable.
What was that?
Jack-o'-lanterns filled with tara masalata. Maybe that was some sort of special occasion. That was quiche. That was crab legs. Duck pancakes. Bratwursts. Just toast that day. Meatballs. Eggnog. Mini crepes. Sherbet dib dabs. Jesus, months and months of my life are literally passing in front of my eyes here. It's enough to give you a panic attack, it really is.
Bond, he's uncoupling the cars.
I mean, really, what were we thinking? This whole sequence is like the ranting mind of a demented pensioner. Not that I myself got too much into the weeds regarding the technical execution of this stuff. I just bring everyone together for a meeting every morning and say something like, today, Skyfall is going to do a big jump, and then he's going to walk forward 5 paces. Sometimes I'd throw in what I called a vibe word, like Laguna or Embassy. And then I'd pretty much clock off for the day, and the crew would get to work, bringing my vision to life.
007 still in pursuit.
Sometimes afterwards, people would come by the cabin and say to me, you know that the name of the main character is James Bond and not Skyfall? To which I would say, you know, f*** off. I've been friends with the Broccolis since I was a baby. I know the name of the main character is James Bond. It's James Bond, codename Skyfall. This is like very basic stuff. the fact that some people on set didn't know that is kind of shocking. And yet I'm the one always treated like an idiot. And, I don't want to sound paranoid, but I definitely got the impression that sometimes people were deliberately not consulting me about creative decisions because they didn't actually think I'd ever directed a film or knew anything about the Bond franchise, which is utterly absurd. I absolutely love all the James Bond films. Like, well, there's too many to name, isn't there? Dr. No, Never Been Kissed. Oh God, what's the one with Goose in the title? The Goose one. All of them. I love them all. I worship them. Unfortunately, in prison, they don't have any of the Bond films. They only have one DVD, and it's quite scutsy. So, haven't seen the Bond films in a while, sadly. Lots of cutting back and forth here to MI6 in London. Dame Judi Dench looking pissy as fuck. Wonderful actor. Take the shot, says M. And so Moneypenny, with the sniper rifle, tries to shoot the baddie off the train. But, spoiler, she hits Skyfall. Skyfall then falls through the sky. Bit of a theme of the movie there. Does he fall to his death? Could that be the end of the film? Well, maybe. To be honest, when we shot it, we didn't know. We'd been shooting by that point for 3 months in Istanbul. I genuinely thought that maybe by that point we had enough in the can to wrap up the film. But no, as it turns out, everything we had done up to that point only got us to the f***ing opening credit sequence. It was about that point in production that I decided that I was going to intentionally foster some kind of debilitating alcohol addiction. Let's flash back now to 2010, back in England, when I was doing vague pre-production work for the film. I probably should have been working on the script, if I'm honest, but at the time, my priority was going go-karting with Adele. It was all part of an elaborate wooing campaign on my part to bring Adele into the project. Adele is, she's a private person and rarely takes a meeting with a stranger, but she can't say no to a go-kart. So if somebody formally challenges her to a race, she simply has to accept. So I rented out this enormous race circuit in Milton Keynes, and sure enough, Adele turned up with her heavies, all of them dressed in these custom gold rally fatigues. Actually, she even had sponsorship for her racing team. Dell Computers. Anyway, I accidentally ran over her witch doctor. It's a dreadful accident. He had neglected to stand in the designated safe zone, and I came off the track at quite a speed and ostensibly smeared this poor witch doctor into the tarmac. By a miracle, he lived. He was touch and go for a few weeks, but I hear he's now made a full recovery. Adele, to her credit, didn't hold a grudge. I mean, she won the race, which probably helped. Also, I did agree to hold on to all of the witch doctor's drugs so it didn't get confiscated by the police. I thought that was the least I could do. That night, I went back to my hotel And I decided that I was going to take one of the witch doctor's pills, which turned out to be a capsule of a drug called DMT. Within about 20 minutes, the walls of my hotel room dissolved away, and I basically experienced that night what would turn out to be a prophetic vision. In my mind's eye, I saw a crumbling house bombarded with what looked to me like giant sperm. Instantly, I knew that this house would be my final location, and something terrible was waiting for me there, upon a set washed in blood, waiting to erase me. When I finally came around from my vision, I discovered, to my horror, that I'd climbed inside the wardrobe and done a little wee in there. Utterly mortifying, really. And I think this is one of the reasons that I blocked out the whole psychedelic episode for so long. Totally forgot about it. Until, of course, it all came true. But that wasn't until much later. Periodically, throughout my stretch in prison, I've asked myself if I'd paid proper attention to that prophetic vision of mine, would I have done things differently? Would I have perhaps left the project before it even started if I knew that at the end of the production I would face this blood-soaked reckoning? And if I'm being honest, I have to say, probably not. I would probably have just used that information to get myself to that blood-soaked reckoning a little faster, because let's be honest, the film is way too long. And if I already knew what the ending was going to be, I probably could have shaved about 40 minutes off the runtime.
I think that would be a good idea.
The Prime Minister's concerned.
So, we have the introduction now of Ralph Fiennes' character, Mallory, M's boss.
That sounds like an evasion.
Forgive me, but why am I here?
3 months ago, you lost the computer drive containing the identity of almost every NATO agent embedded in terrorist organizations across...
Ralph's a wonderful actor, a exquisite human being, who simply by being his perfect self inadvertently makes everybody else feel like an utter piece of shit. It's excruciating, actually, being in his presence.
When your current posting is completed, you'll be awarded GCMG.
Little story about Rafe. While we were setting up for this scene, Rafe was in the garden playing a quick game of five-a-side with the crew, keeping up morale, which of course he does effortlessly. According to my gaffer, he scored a hat-trick. Then, just as Rafe was coming back in from the garden, he got a text to say that a painting of his that he'd painted had just been sold for £1 million at Sotheby's, which he'd already arranged to be anonymously donated to a children's hospital. What a Now, if all these London scenes feel a little bit like padding, you'd be right. I initially brought the crew back to London so I could have a couple of cheap weeks while I worked out the rest of the story. But sadly, rather than work out the rest of the story, I reconnected with my drug dealer friend, Christopher. My one big creative decision that I'd made so far was to kill James Bond, and now that was out. Broccolis had told me I had to reverse it, so fine. But now I was stuck in this narrative cul-de-sac. But I had to film something, so I did a bunch of stuff with Judy. So here we are, with M and her laptop butler. Laptop butler is showing M that MI6 has been hacked, and that M's office computer at MI6 is the source. Laptop butler here, of course, played by Roy Kinnear, fresh from playing Hamlet at the National. And I think that experience carries straight into his role here. So now, the butler's laptop has also been infected with this lame Terry Gilliam-style animation. Hackers are sort of the modern equivalent of Monty Python, I think. They both have that same combination of being extremely silly, whilst also being deeply unpleasant misanthropes. It was actually Judy who suggested we use this film to draw attention to Britain's long history of war crimes carried out by our intelligence services. I actually found the idea so compelling, I suggested we immediately go and blow up the MI6 building. That idea of mine eventually got watered down to us pretending to blow up MI6 as a scene in the movie. Still better than nothing. And now we cut from this fiery, earth-shattering explosion to a sexual explosion, i.e. intercourse. Dan Craig, mid-coitus with a woman. Danny boy, the pipes are calling. So yes, we are now back with Skyfall himself. No longer dead, not anymore. He's just been laying low these 3 months, shagging his way through a Turkish beach community. The film crew had only just left Turkey a few weeks earlier, so yeah, they were pretty pissed that I now wanted to go back again and shoot an extra week. But, well, once the Broccolis and I came collectively to the decision to not kill James Bond in the opening 10 minutes of the film, it just felt necessary to add in this little beat here to paper over the new change in direction. Almost the entire crew in this shot here. Sadly, most of the people in this shot ended up testifying against me in court. But this day was a good day. Look at this scorpion here. God. Magnificent actor. Let me just briefly return to that editing decision from a few minutes ago, where I cut directly from an exploding building in London to the climactic moment of a sex scene, because discovering that juxtaposition was quite revelatory for me on a personal level. Making art is always a journey of self-discovery. I had no idea that blowing things up would have such a profound effect on me in a erotic sense. I found that I was quite beguiled sexually by the image of spontaneous eruptions of fire and smoke, particularly if I was in some way responsible for the eruption. It's called pyrophilia, I know that now. It's quite tragic, really, because most pyrophiliacs go through their entire life without ever knowing that they even have the condition. It's just an aspect of one's personality that one simply doesn't learn about oneself until one finds themselves, directing a Bond film. So all these feelings are regrettably awakening within me throughout this shoot. And, I will admit, I did actually talk to my crew about the possibility of these coffins here, draped in Union Jacks, whether they could be rigged to explode and blow up M here. But thankfully, I was so out of my mind on cocaine during this period that my creative requests mostly came out as a kind of incomprehensible cackle. So a lot of this stuff went graciously unnoticed. Even at the time, I knew my judgment was off. I was self-aware enough to recognize that I had a problem. So to protect the film from this growing kink of mine, I decided to put some additional guardrails in place. And by rails, yes, I mean cocaine, which I had found in large enough quantities would prevent me from any kind of sexual proclivity. So whenever I felt the sudden sexual urge to blow something up, I would simply pop back to the hotel for a quick cold shower and a drug binge, and then I would be straight back on set to direct our magnificent actors. Like this wonderful bit of sparring between Danny and Judy here. Skyfall sneaking into M's house to call her a bloody bitch. God, this is real. Electric cinema, yeah.
Speak for yourself.
Ronson didn't make it, did he?
No.
Actually, I don't think I was on set for this. I guess I must have been back at the hotel that day. Bravely, fighting my sexual perversions. I am sorry to go on about this stuff. I'm just trying to share my side of the story, which was somewhat mangled by the courts and the British press. I just feel one doesn't get credit for all the explosions one doesn't set off. People tend to fixate on the small amount of explosions that actually happen.
Put your things into storage. Standard procedure on the death of an unmarried employee with no next of kin.
In case you hadn't noticed, production has moved once again back to London. But this time I felt like I had more of a plan going forward, which was this. I thought, what if, rather than jumping straight to another fancy international location and kicking off our high-octane espionage plot, what if, rather than that, what if for the next hour of the film, Skyfall basically just hung around waiting to be sent on a mission? And then we can just fill that runtime with various conversations with his colleagues saying, you look a bit peaky, Skyfall. Maybe you shouldn't be allowed to go on a mission after all. Now, that might seem like an unconventional structure for a spy film, but I had 3 very good reasons why I thought this should be the direction. First reason was I saw this as a kind of intentional mirroring of my personal experience making the film. There were lots of questions circulating regarding my competence, and so I wanted to use my art to explore all of the emotions that was stirring up. I could have just written a sad poem in my journal, but I had this $1 billion sandbox at my disposal. Am I seriously not going to use this incredible resource as a therapeutic tool to make me feel better about myself? My second reason for keeping Bond off work in London was, I was becoming increasingly worried about potentially losing control of myself, libido-wise, if we attempted any more big action sequences. So I just thought it was safer if maybe I steered the rest of this Bond film towards something more conversational, more philosophical, something a bit closer to My Dinner with Andre, for example. My third and final reason, though, for keeping the crew here in London for as long as possible was really from a practical standpoint. I needed to stay local. Since returning to London, I'd become quite ensconced in the city, particularly in relation to organised crime. I'd racked up a rather significant amount of debt due to the various medical supplies required to keep my pyrophilia in check, but eventually various pipers needed to be paid, and so I came up with an arrangement through which a portion of the replica firearms that we had made for the film would be donated to a local crime family known as the Funny Bastards. Absolutely delightful bunch of lads. Young guys, very entrepreneurial. The name Funny Bastards, I believe, is due to their close association with laughing gas. absolutely love this scene. Really wish I'd been there on this date. Skyfall is having a psych evaluation, running a little bit of fun word association. Now, this draft plays fine, but I do still prefer my original draft of Bond's responses. If I remember correctly, it was something like...
Gun.
Penis.
Agent.
Penis.
Woman.
No cry.
Heart.
Break hotel.
Bird.
Shack.
M.
And M's, i.e. the sweeties.
Sunlight.
Bored.
Moonlight.
Bored.
Murder.
Interested.
Country.
Dancing.
Skyfall.
Hello? Delivered in a kind of unhinged way. And then M on the other side of the two-way mirror was supposed to say, Christ, I wouldn't trust that little skank to bat his own eyelids, which was something I actually overheard Judy say about me just a few days earlier. Judy was probably a little bit shocked to see her words from a private conversation suddenly appear in the following day's pages, but what can I say? I know a good line when I hear one. As I said, I was trying to use this production as a cipher for my own contemporaneous experience. So, in fact, lots of the horrible things the people were saying about me made it into the script. I actually wrote a scene in which Mallory, the Ralph Fiennes character, calls Bond an incompetent coke weasel. I also decided to shoot a scene where we saw Bond snorting coke off a framed picture of the Queen, and then go watch The Lion King on the West End whilst totally off his face, and accidentally evacuate himself during the song Hakuna Matata.
She's ready for you.
It's quite subtle, but if you squint, you can sort of identify the autobiographical elements beneath the surface. I can't actually remember if any of those scenes made the final cut. Well, we'll see. Stealing all the replica guns from the set was a little bit trickier than I'd anticipated. All of the weapons were kept in a gun safe, which was itself kept inside a special room with a combination lock, and both of those combinations were known only to our on-set armourer. But I thought to myself, what if, for the numeric combination, they've just... I mean, they wouldn't be stupid enough to have just used as the combination 007, but they had, so that certainly made things a bit easier. Here's the plan as I presented it to my gangland friends. I said to them, listen, I'll be your inside man, but you guys have to come on set to get the guns yourselves. I'm a professional storyteller, so I know how to create a good cover story that will give you guys access to the set. And for that story, we're going to play on your two main assets. Asset number one, some of you guys are very, very young looking. Most of you guys are still teenagers after all. So let's pick a handful of guys from your organisation, the youngest looking guys, to do this job. Asset number two, your chronic addiction to nitrous oxide means you guys always have a ton of balloons on you at all times. Nothing says innocent more than a child holding a bunch of balloons. So let's get these young lads, hand them a bunch of balloons each, put them in a nice shirt. We're not going to have any problems. So when your delegates arrive at the security gate, get them to ask for me. I'll sign them in as kids from a Make-A-Wish Foundation. I'll walk them on set. If they want, They can even do a quick meet and greet with Danny and Dame Judy. Not Rafe, because we'll be here all fucking day. But then, at some prearranged time, I'll give them a tour of the fuse box in the basement. They can then tie me up, kill the power, and then they'll have a good 6 minutes or so to pop into the armory and shove down their baggy trousers as many replica weapons as their heart desires. And then they can, see themselves out. There's no security footage of the crime. I can plead ignorance of the whole heist and claim I was duped too. You'll get your guns, and we'll consider my debt paid. I will admit, the gangsters were a little unsure about the potential risks to begin with, but I storyboarded it all out for them, and put their minds at ease somewhat. Sadly, though, it turns out I'm not very good at storyboarding, and due to a couple of mistakes made on my part, the gang regrettably ended up turning up 12 hours early for the heist. Also, due to a communication breakdown, rather than a small delegation of the gang, the entire criminal organisation turned up at the gates. All 300 members in nice shirts, festooned with balloons. Also, I'm led to believe that the balloons were not filled with air, but, chuckle gas.
Yes, Mum.
But, of course, at the time, I was not at Waterloo Tunnels to walk them past security. I was still busy shooting this scene out on location. And because I have a no phones policy on sets, I had absolutely no idea about the extremely upsetting events that were simultaneously unfolding on the other side of the city. You see, I was just laser focused on these wonderful performances from Danny and Benjamin here. Fantastic watching these two guys go at it. And of course, getting to film inside the gorgeous National Gallery. What a treat. It's like a palace where the royal owners have been executed, the furniture destroyed, and now the peasants get to just hang out inside, making excuses just to be there, even though it's boring and there's nothing to do. My initial plan was to have Dan and Ben sit in front of the painting, The Ambassadors by Hans Holbein the Younger, because of that wonderful hidden memento mori, which felt like a nice motif, appropriate somehow. But Danny and Benjamin wanted to use a Turner, and had worked out this whole exchange, so I said, fine, I haven't written any scripts anyway.
Not pulled. It's hard to know which in your pajamas.
Unbeknownst to us, this was the exact moment that a gang of some 300 teenage criminals forced their way onto our Waterloo set and were proceeding to burn the entire place to the ground. I don't know if you can imagine being in the shoes of the people on set that day, to suddenly find oneself surrounded by adorable looking children from the Make-A-Wish Foundation, who all then suddenly start huffing on their teddy bear balloons and throwing Molotov cocktails. Judi Dench, I heard, had to scramble under a bit of loose carpet. Seeing as I'd already given them the combination, they still managed to steal all the replica guns, and all 300 lads somehow managed to flee the scene before any emergency services arrived. No fatalities, thankfully, but my life was very much in danger, you see, as because I hadn't been there in person to walk the boys in and facilitate the cover story. The gang still believed that I had essentially welched on our arrangement. So the word was that the funny bastards had now put me on their kill list. I was to be murked on sight, which, yes, is as bad as it sounds, sadly. So, hearing that, I thought maybe this would be a really great moment in the script for Bond to go and do something on the other side of the planet. So, we moved production to Shanghai, which was about as far as I could get from both the British police and the huge criminal gang that I just armed to the teeth. Skyfall, having a lovely midnight swim here. Danny Craig was pretty sick of me by this point. I mean, he was already being forced to improvise most of the script. I think he also probably suspected my involvement in the teenage fire assault upon our multi-million-pound London set. Look at Dan, giving me the evil eye there. Eyes of a strangler. I'm not sure whether Dan was picking up on my guilt or my arousal. I hate to say it, but this is the burden of the pyrophiliac. One simply cannot help one's horniness around a magnificent blaze like that. I mean, I was obviously mortified, absolutely wretched with guilt and fear also. I was terrified about the potential repercussions, and yet I was also feeling very erotic. I couldn't help myself, and Dan you might have picked up on that. Of course, the biggest shame about the fire attack was that no one bothered to turn on any of the cameras. We could easily have worked that whole escapade into the story. I'm absolutely sure of it. One hates to have one's livelihood go up in flames and not even have a camera running. Dan barely said a word to me for the entire time we were in Shanghai, so I basically said to him, fine, you don't want to talk? Don't talk at all. We'll do the entire sequence without any words. See how much you like it then. You can just tit about like Charlie Chaplin for a couple of weeks. When the light on Danny's gun lights up, look at this little smile here. Ooh. Oh, baddie shot someone. Oh no, sad face. Maybe guns aren't funny after all. Brilliant. What an incredible non-dialogue scene. Shakespeare in action. I flew in the baddie from the Istanbul sequence, and I said to him, we're just going to shoot you and Danny wandering around for a few days. Roger's going to make it look like both of you are trapped inside a giant pinball table. Work the rest out amongst yourselves. I'm off to the State Security Bureau to request asylum status as a political refugee. Because, as I mentioned, I was a little apprehensive about returning to Britain. Plus, I really like China. I'd happily relocate, but I didn't have time to go through the official green card process. So I thought selling state secrets might be a quick way to secure a residence and maybe get the MSS to pay for it as well. And the thing about making a Bond film is you have a lot of very official looking military documents just knocking about the place. And perhaps this is a good moment for me to shout out our magnificent prop department. Fantastic bunch of artists. Incredible eye for detail. Always working through the nights because at 2 a.m. I've called somebody up and said, oi, tomorrow I need I don't know, to pull an example out of thin air, ultra-realistic MI6 dossier containing information on every British counterintelligence agent currently embedded in the People's Republic of China. Something like that. So anyway, I wasn't on set for a lot of this whole sequence. I was mostly sitting in a waiting room over at the SSSB, waiting for someone to process my spanking new Chinese passport. Now, you must believe me, at the time, I genuinely thought my plan to sell spy information to a foreign power was an incredibly good idea. As good as any creative idea that I'd had for the plot for Skyfall. It wasn't until much later that I realised it was actually the same idea as the plot for Skyfall. God, I did know that I'd heard it somewhere before. I mean, it's no big deal, really. I mean, it's not a crime to plagiarise yourself, is it? I'll tell you what is a crime now. Fraud and conspiracy to commit espionage under the Official Secrets Act. Those are crimes. So maybe I shouldn't have been quite so cavalier with my creative license. In the end, the Chinese secret police didn't give me a passport. They just kept me trapped in their waiting room for 3 days without food or a toilet whilst they ransacked my hotel room. Eventually, they did release me from their building on the understanding that I threw myself down their fire escape a couple of times. And I was happy to oblige. They did follow me, though. The secret police. I ended up sort of running, shrieking through the city, fearing for my life. Anyway, eventually I lost them. And at that point, it was safe to finally return here to the set. I was a little bit hysterical when I arrived. Babbling, rolling around on the floor like a baby. Sheer terror. Shockingly, though, not one member of the crew had noticed that I'd been missing for the last 3 days, which was a little bit galling. However, I've got to say, I think they did some of their best work on the film while I was away. I still love what they came up with here. We may not have used my choice of painting in the gallery scene, but how's about this for a painting with a hidden memento mori? All it takes is for the viewer to slightly alter their perspective, and suddenly, what do they see within the paint? But bang! Death. This was all invented by my DOP, Roger Deakins. He came up with this whole assassination sequence, but apparently, Roger tells me that he initially got the idea for it from a drug-fueled rant of mine on the plane when we were flying out here. Apparently, I was shrieking at him about how all art is secretly about death. And, I've no memory of saying any of that, but Roger took it in, and it's incredible, really, to see the persistent thoughts of one's own demented brain reflected back so crisply, powerfully. I felt as if Roger had pulled something from my unconscious into my waking mind. And watching back the dailies of this moment, I found myself starting to obsess over this concept. Art that secretly contains a death. Those of you that have read about me in the papers probably know where this is heading, but this is the moment when I first began to formulate the possibility of using this motion picture of ours to, well, there's really no nice way to say it, to conceal a real-life killing. Just as a still-life painting might contain a skull to remind us that one day we will die, could a motion picture, I wondered, contain within it a real-life death? One that could only be seen from certain angles, with certain eyes, but it would be there for those who knew where to look. A real-life death as a message, a reminder of human fragility, of our mortality. It was a an unconventional idea. Perhaps a little, dare I say it, a little art house. But this was something I just kept turning over in my mind as the shoot continued on to the Macau gambling district. That's where we are now, in a casino hotel in Macau. Danny and the wonderful actor Naomi Harris having some flirty bants. By this point, I'm happy to say that I had managed to curb the majority of my drug taking. China, after all, has some of the most stringent anti-narcotics laws in the world. Just the ambient amount of cocaine found in my beard back in England would be enough to get me executed for trafficking in China. So, much to the relief of my crew, I was no longer a drug-addled mess. Of course, I was now in withdrawal, permanently covered in sweat and invisible beetles. And without drugs in my system 24/7, my pyrophilia was reawakening, and I was beginning to have quite disturbing, elaborate sexual fantasies about having sex with burning buildings. Not inside, with. And I was unable to sleep or eat. And I was still utterly terrified to my core that the Chinese secret police were about to, pull me off the street, take me into a secret facility, and then drop me into a giant food blender. So I was still inebriated around the clock, basically, to try and take the edge off it all.
He's a bureaucrat.
You should do your homework.
I'm embarrassed to share that these guys had to do this scene multiple times because I kept forgetting not to talk. I just kept thinking that it was just the three of us hanging out together in a hotel room and having a chat, and so I'd just strike up and say something like, "Oh, shall I put a CD on?" And then everything would stop and Danny would yell at me, "Oh, Trevor, this is a dramatic scene. Did you forget again?" And I'd go, "Oh, yes, sorry, my mind was wandering again. Got a lot on my plate. Sorry about that." And then Danny would pace about and punch a couple of wooden beams, and then we'd start all over again. And I did have a lot on my mind, to be fair. I knew it was only a matter of time before either the British authorities or my gangland friends or the Chinese secret police caught up with me. And the only thing protecting me from my enemies was this film, really. Through the funds and the means it provides, I can stay on the run for the time being. But it was like being on this melting ice floe. Like the budget was dwindling. One way or another, we were going to have to wrap in 5-6 weeks, and no matter where I'd escaped to, wherever I was, when the music finally stopped, I would be royally f***ed. Killed or arrested, basically. So, this is what got me thinking. If my life was already going to be over when the film wrapped, why give someone else the pleasure of taking my life? If it's going to end, I should be the one to end it. And also, while I have it, I should use my power as director to really make it a bloody good suicide. I can use this Bond film, I thought, to engineer an incredible end to myself, using whatever influence I have remaining over the story. I can create an incredible set piece to facilitate my death. What's more, I can get it on film, and more than that, I can get it in the film. If I engineer my suicide so it happens in a shot so expensive that it would be impossible for my successor to edit around the footage, it would end up in the film. This was the idea, I suspect, that had been percolating in the background of my brain ever since I took on the project. Now, at last, I realized its purpose. Skyfall was to be my coffin, yes, but on the screen I would live forever. Mostly in infamy. Nevertheless, it would be the Easter egg to end all Easter eggs. A folk legend that, of course, everyone would deny. The Broccolis would make sure no one ever spoke of it. But yet, the rumour would remain. So here we are on the gaming floor of our Macau casino. Skyfall now finally coming face to face with our female anti-hero character, Severine, played by Berenice Maclaw, who is a wonderful actor. Do I use that phrase too often? Wonderful actor? Maybe. I just think all acting, is wonderful. Somebody in front of you pretending to be someone else. What's not to like? So, we've just seen Skyfall collect a large suitcase of money. I wanted to use real bills for this scene, but the Broccolis requested that we use fake cash instead. In fact, the Broccolis insisted that the money should be purposefully bad replicas to prohibit any potential risk of the prop being stolen or misused. So I guess the Broccolis were on to me by that point.
A little like our friend in Shanghai.
I did feel a little bit personally victimized by that decision. Because as you might imagine, a big suitcase of free money would absolutely get me out of my current life-threatening situation. I could bribe my way out of China, pay my way off that Merc list back in England, pay my way clear of any connection to the Waterloo fire, and still have enough left to buy myself a nice super yacht. Or a zoo, maybe. But no, we had to use fake bills with Woody Woodpecker's face on them.
She's pretty.
No.
If you like that sort of thing.
Technically, I directed this scene, but I think I was mostly just hiding behind the monitor with my notebook, trying to come up with a fantastic way to kill myself. Because I wanted to factor my suicide into the background of some future action set piece, I ended up doing the most amount of story development that day than I did for the entire rest of the shoot. I actually worked out some future scenes for once. Specifically, I came up with this idea for a big action sequence that I wanted to set on the Japanese island of Hashima. Now, if you've never heard of Hashima, it's basically a island-sized ghost town. Once it was a mining community, it was abandoned in the 70s, untouched ever since, and now it's this crumbling ruin. It looks positively post-apocalyptic, a wonderful, atmospheric place for one to attempt suicide, particularly given the budget that we could spend on the whole thing. So I came up with a scene that we could shoot there that could also potentially conceal my death, and then I passed it on to the crew to work out the rest of the details. Obviously, I kept stum about the whole suicide business. In general, it helps for a director to hold some stuff back, lest it jeopardize the whole scene. Of course, I was deeply unwell at the time, and I feel quite sorry for this past version of me that was seriously considering ending his life. And the fact that I had turned my suicide into this grandiose cinematic gesture only made it harder for me to recognize the error of my ways. It's hard to locate reason within art, because art creates its own reason, and so I found myself quite seduced by this creative project of mine that I'd mapped out in my little notebook. At the centre of it all, I'd lost hope, you see. And what I failed to realise at the time is that there's always hope. Fundamentally so. One never knows what the future might bring. But those days filming in Macau, for some reason, I just couldn't imagine a future. Until, one night, after we'd wrapped filming for the day, when I won $185 million on the baccarat table. I should point out that's Hong Kong dollars, converts to about 20 million British sterling. Now, I had put up about £1 million of the film's budget on the table to begin with, but that still meant I was up about 19 million. A quite unbelievable turn of events. I spent the rest of the night in the back office of the casino, filling out forms, going through the tedious verification process. So it was actually about 7 a.m. when I finally received the cashier's check for my winnings. And I was offered a security detail to escort me straight to the bank to deposit it. But I was already due on set by then, sadly. And I did also really want to rub it in some people's noses. So I said to the casino, "It's cool, lads. I'll take the check in myself later." Anyway, I get on set and I see Danny. He's limbering up for this Komodo dragon fight scene here. FYI, we weren't allowed to use a real Komodo dragon for this scene of the film. So, sadly, instead we had to use CGI. But, so the actors still had something to react to in the space where the Komodo dragon should be. I placed a large Argentinian rattlesnake. Little tricks in filmmaking like this really do make all the difference. So anyway, in between setups, I took Danny to one side, check in hand, and I said to him, "Look, I know I have been an incoherent, mostly antagonistic presence on set throughout this process, a dead weight at best. You've all had to carry me, do my job for me. I appreciate that. I really do. And yes, if you're wondering, I am personally responsible for the destruction of our Waterloo set. Also, this entire production is now being monitored by Chinese intelligence. You might not know that, but we might all be at risk, and that's my fault too. I think you already had your suspicions. Well, you were 100% correct. I'm just being a straight shooter here by telling you this, okay, Dan? Just respect my candor, okay? Respect it, because I'm not just owning up to my mistakes here. I am promising you that I am going to fix everything that I've broken." And then I handed Danny the check, and I said to him, "Read that, because with this, I am going to make everything right. This is me showing you that you can put your trust in me again. So, do you trust me?" Danny looked at the check, and then he looked at me, and he nodded, and I thought we understood each other. So when Daniel Craig suddenly started screaming, I was confused. And that was when I realized that I had just been bitten by an Argentinian rattlesnake that had somehow slithered off its mark, and I had to be rushed to a hospital to receive a critical anti-venom treatment. Got myself stuck on a ward for 48 hours, which meant I didn't get back behind the camera for this bloody shower sex scene, which had been my idea in the first place. Anyway, when I was in hospital, I thought leaving my check in the possession of Hollywood actor Daniel Craig was probably one of the safest places that I could leave something valuable. But when I caught up with him back at the hotel that night, he acted like he had no idea what the fuck I was talking about. What check, Trevor? What heartfelt confession of all your wrongdoings? I told him, don't play fucking games. I literally saw you complete an extremely acrobatic action sequence. Then I walked over to you, you were eating a chicken sandwich, and then we had that conversation, and then I passed you the check. And then I was bit by a snake. Dan was like, "What the fuck are you talking about? I'm vegan, I hate chicken sandwiches." That was the point when I just started screaming. Because liking chicken is one of the few things I know about Daniel Craig. I had no idea what was going on anymore. Dan then bops me on the nose. Down I go, utterly stunned. And then Dan says, "We're done." He says he's going to go tell the Broccolis that he wants me off the project. I'll get to direct the scenes on Hashima Island next week, but after that, I am going to be officially relieved from my duties, and he's going to make sure of it. Next thing I know, the crew are separating us, and both Danny and I are getting frog-marched into separate taxis to the airport. You see, whilst we'd been finishing up on Macau, the second unit had also been working hard, prepping for the scenes I'd written for Hashima Island. Although if the crew really knew what I had them building, perhaps they'd have been less in a hurry to get there. Here they are, Skyfall and Severin, in this beautiful boat, heading out towards this dead island construction of mine. They're supposed to be heading to the lair of the main villain of our story, the man behind all the pain. I remember being on the other side of the camera here, looking at Daniel Craig and wondering, why are you doing this to me? Why are you torturing me like this? I had so many questions, but there was one thing I knew for certain. I was still the one telling the story. For now, the story was still mine to tell, and I would write my way to a happy ending. I would not let this film kill me by suicide or any other means. I had fleetingly seen a path to happiness. I didn't care how convoluted I had to make the second half of this Bond film. I was going to get what I wanted. However, that was probably going to involve murdering Daniel Craig. Yes. It was definitely going to involve murdering Daniel Craig. So, here we are, following both Severin and Skyfall as they are escorted at gunpoint through this strange island, this crumbling ghost town, which is being used as a secret base for our hitherto unseen arch-criminal Raoul Silva. Now, we decided to hold back this meeting with the central villain character to the halfway point of the film because I hadn't written him. Not the foggiest who this guy was going to be, apart from the name, of course. Had the name. Great name. But that was it. But we couldn't kick that can down the road any longer. You've really got to get the villain in before the whole film is over. Now, I had a long list of potential villain ideas. A Russian circus strongman who can fire poison blow darts from a harmonica. A man with a split personality, that was one idea. One personality is the greatest sniper in the world. The other personality is the chairman of Mensa. So, both very smart and very dangerous, but only one at a time. That's the Achilles heel there. There was also talk of a kind of feral dog man, a sort of genetic experiment gone awry. Mick Jagger was interested. The one I pitched really hard to the Broccolis, though, was I wanted Raoul Silva to turn out to be Skyfall's evil twin brother. And I was going to get Danny Craig to play both sides. The evil one was going to have buck teeth and a pet cockroach. Doubling up like this is obviously great for budgetary reasons, but also it would significantly increase the chances of me being able to injure Daniel Craig on set, which was part of the private campaign of violence that I was now launching against the man. The way I saw it, if I knocked Craig about a bit, I could probably scare him into giving me back the money that he'd stolen off me. And if that failed, I would simply engineer a deadly accident on set and prize that cashier cheque of mine out of his cold dead hands.
And you're not nearly the agent I was, I can tell you that.
You have to remember my state of mind here. I was a man in the throes of narcotic withdrawal, on a kill list for a London gang, pursued by both British and Chinese authorities. And also, I didn't know that you could cancel and reissue cashier's checks. I thought they were different from normal checks. But yeah, apparently... Anyway, I didn't know that I could have just called up the casino and had it reissued. Hence the whole plotting a murder business. So obviously, I have some regrets there. Anyway, the Broccolis hated the evil twin idea. Instead, they wanted to hire Javier Bardem, and so here he is. Wonderful actor, goes without saying. But because we only hired him 12 hours before his first scene, Javier only had the length of his plane ride to come up with a shtick. So apparently, Javier based the look of Silva on his childhood orthodontist, a man he clearly despised. The way that I originally planned this whole confrontation was very different to what you're seeing here on screen. Silva was originally supposed to take Skyfall out to the courtyard where he had this giant catapult set up. Silva was supposed to threaten Skyfall with it, you know, plop him in the big spoon, threaten to fling him into a building. And then, during the ensuing fight sequence, Skyfall was supposed to launch one of Silva's goons in the catapult, propelling said goon into a passing helicopter and blowing it up. Of course, almost all of the effects would be done in post. We just needed the physical catapult and a small to medium-sized explosion for the helicopter. The flung goon could be digitally added later. That was the scene that I pitched to my team. Of course, I originally had a secret plan to use this scene to take my own life. I was originally going to run on set during the filming of this scene and launch myself for real in that catapult into the explosion. And, you know, that was going to be my legacy. Captured forever. And celluloid. But now that I had refound my lust for life, so to speak, I thought to myself, well, you know, if I'm not going to fling myself, maybe I could use the catapult to fling Daniel Craig into something. Ideally, not kill him yet, but absolutely severely incapacitate him so I could force a filming extension, search his room, psychologically dominate him, etc., etc. But then in comes Javier Bardem with his strong opinions about catapults. Oh no, Trevor, that doesn't feel right for the character at all. I don't think Raul Silva would use a catapult. He's too sophisticated. He would use a trebuchet. Well, Javier, I said, we haven't built a fucking trebuchet. We've built a catapult. Okay, he says to me, but I'm telling you, if Raul Silva is going to use a catapult, I'm going to have to redesign the entire character from scratch. He's going to need a completely different silly wig, maybe a big Don King-style back-combed electrified look. Maybe pair that with a zoot suit and a single sequined glove, because that's the kind of villain who would own his own catapult. If that's what you want, Javier says, I can give it to you. Of course, that means we're going to have to reshoot everything that I've done so far, like that huge one-shot monologue scene of mine. We're going to have to do that all again with my new look. Except this time, I'm going to need to arrive in a slow metal lift that's even slower than the one we shot today. And for the record, I was willing. I wanted to see where this was going. I thought Javier was cooking here. But the Broccolis wouldn't stump for the reshoot. So in the end, no catapult and no trebuchet. And Javier instead got to come up with his own action set piece. Craig was now mostly keeping to his trailer whenever he was off camera. He'd hired extra security to keep me away from him. Even on set, he would only talk to me by passing me notes, most of which were aggressively sketched small penises. From Craig's perspective, he just had to get through the rest of these Hashima scenes, and then I'd be relieved of my duties. According to the Broccolis, my successor, Sam Mendes, was apparently already en route. But what the Broccolis didn't know, and Craig didn't know, is that I already had my contingency plan in place. They were playing twat drafts with a chess master, and I was already 10 moves ahead. You see, the art department had already built me my catapult. Now that it wasn't needed on set, no one was paying attention to it. I was free to move that catapult wherever I wanted. Ironically, my new plan was, in fact, inspired by the scene that's playing out on screen right here, where Bond is forced to try and shoot a tumbler of whiskey off the top of Severin's head here. So in a funny way, I have Javier to thank for inspiring me with this crummy William Tell ripoff. See, I'd carefully positioned my catapult just beyond this courtyard on the other side of these buildings here. On the catapult, I had positioned an office chair that I'd stolen from my Video Village. Video Village is the little trailer where I have all my monitors set up to review footage, etc. So I'd borrowed a chair, I'd Googled the exact weight of the chair, very important information, and then I'd loaded it onto the big spoon and precisely angled the catapult so that it would fling the chair over the wall into the courtyard, taking out that little drinks table right next to Daniel Craig. Yes, it was an incredibly difficult shot, but I knew the scene. I had detailed drawings of the location to work out my trig. It's a very static scene, so I knew precisely where everyone was standing, as long as everyone stayed on their fucking mark. Craig was going to literally shit his pants. It was the perfect message. Once he knew that I could get to him anywhere, anytime, the check would be back in my hands faster than you can say. Cowboys and aliens. Anyway, I fired the office chair at these poor fuckers. Didn't even make it over the wall, but it's not my fault. I'm pretty sure I would have precisely taken out that little table if I'd remembered to properly secure the catapult before firing. Sadly, I forgot to put the brakes on. And the force of the fired catapult instead caused the catapult to shoot backwards, rolling down the hill behind me and colliding with Video Village at the bottom, sending the entire trailer, I'm afraid to say, over the edge of the cliff and into the sea below. And so I thought to myself, oh well, looks like I'm going to be faking my own death. So that's what happened. So, the story returns to London now. Skyfall has brought in the baddie, having snatched him up off his secret island. From here on out, officially, this is Sir Sam Mendes behind the camera. He's the one officially calling the shots. And I'm sure Sir Sam would like to take full credit for the rest of the film from here on out. However, in actual fact, I still had a significant hand in the direction of the story. It's just, from now on, I'm more influencing things from the shadows. Phantom of the Opera style. You know, I'm in the walls now. I'm under the floor. I'm a voice in the wind, subliminally influencing the story best I can through small, subtle acts of sabotage and a dab of neurolinguistic programming. The catapult accident on Hashima Island did halt production for a while my death was investigated by the Japanese authorities. They found my baseball cap amongst the underwater wreckage of the Video Village, which I had intentionally discarded there for this reason. There were plenty of nooks on Hashima Island for me to hide myself away until the crew was ready to return to the UK. I was able to smuggle myself home inside a flight case for transporting candles. Part of Daniel Craig's rider is that he insists on having in his trailer something called a candle tree. It's a wrought iron structure that holds 14 giant luxury Parisian candles, which, as luck would have it, equals roughly the same weight as a human being. So I dumped the wax and packed myself into the case instead. Really not that different at all to coming back to England in a coffin. In fact, it would have been considerably better, on the whole, to have travelled home in a coffin, actually. If you can imagine being crushed into a fetal position, breathing through a tiny crack for roughly 23 hours. Plenty of time there for me to consider my life choices. On the plus side, now that I was technically dead, there was considerably less chance of me being murdered by my gangland associates back in London. Equally, I was less worried now about British authorities tracking me down for the Waterloo fire or conspiring to sell secrets to the Chinese, as long as I was able to maintain this particular cover story and stay dead convincingly, which I was pretty confident I could do. That said, I still had unfinished business with this film shoot here. Scores to settle, vengeance to enact, havoc to cry. Hence my decision to stay close and sequester myself away on the film set, usually hiding in a bin, and to try and steer the chaos of film production towards my own dark ends. Silver removing his teeth here to reveal a past injury at the hands of MI5. Some grand, Gignalesque grotesquerie from Javier here. And yet, just imagine how much scarier this all would have been if this guy also had Don King hair and a zoot suit. I mean, the version of Silver that we got is fine. It's fine. This version is very guy at Mar-a-Lago whose golf caddies keep disappearing, which is great, but I really wish we'd gotten to see Javier's second draft of the character. Oh well. I don't know exactly why MI5 have built this weird plexiglass cube to hold the baddie in here. He's not fucking Magneto, is he? Also, very soon it's going to be revealed that Silver wanted to be arrested all along, and it was all part of his villainous plan. Which is just like the plot of The Dark Knight, which incidentally several of our crew had just wrapped on, which is interesting, isn't it? Funny how things suddenly became so much more derivative as soon as I exited the project. It's almost as if my coked up murderous energy had actually been vital to the creative engine of the story. I don't know, just a thought. Anyway, here we have Q breaking every single intelligence protocol and just blindly connecting the laptop of a terrorist hacker straight into the MI6 mainframe without any prior screening, thus unwittingly allowing Silver to take over all of MI6's computer systems. I do remember watching this scene from my bin and feeling quite frustrated. You can actually see my bin in some of these shots. I removed the base so I could shuffle about the set quite freely. Fortunately, the continuity department were preoccupied with Ben Whyshaw's hair. I actually spent about a week loosening the bolts on Q's big TV screen here, hoping it would fall onto Daniel Craig's head. I want to be clear, hurting Craig was pure malice by this point. I just wanted to end him, really, for destroying my life. I was no longer interested in retrieving the money that Dan had stolen from me. Even if I got the check back, since I'd already been declared dead, control of my bank accounts had already transferred to my executor, the American rapper Pitbull, who is my second cousin and the only member of my extended family I'm even vaguely on good terms with. But no, even if I offered Pitbull a percentage of my winnings, I trust that guy about as far as I could throw him, so the money was lost, I thought. And I put all of that squarely on Dan's shoulders, square shoulders. It really felt like Dan was the one who had killed me. Indirectly, but also kind of directly, if I'm honest. He made me do it. And now I was nothing more than a avenging ghost trying to settle the score. This big screen Q is looking at here with all these squiggly lines. This is supposed to be a visual representation of Silver's encryption system, which Bond is somehow able to just squint at and somehow make out a critical word which just happens to be floating across the screen for some reason? I mean, I'm no encryption expert, but I'm pretty sure my fucking handwriting is a more secure form of encryption than whatever Silver's using here. Now, you can make the case that my successor, Sir Sam Mendes, is really doing the best he can with a somewhat undercooked plot, and that really it's my fault for never getting around to writing a script or setting up any stakes or creating really any discernible momentum towards an ending, which now means that Sir Sam has to cobble together a series of plot holes and contrivances in order to manufacture some kind of meaning to everything we've seen so far on screen. Not to mention, due to ongoing investigations into my maybe treasonous activity in Shanghai, the crew had now been ordered to remain in the UK for the rest of the shoot, whilst the real MI6 investigated exactly how fake documents from our prop department ended up in the hands of the Chinese government. So, sure, Sir Mendes might have been handed somewhat a poisoned chalice, but a poisoned chalice is still a chalice, isn't it? Oh, I'm sorry, your bejeweled chalice isn't all it's cracked up to be, Sir Mendes. You still get to be the credited director of Skyfall while I rot in the maximum security prison in the Highlands, so excuse me if I don't weep too many tears for you, Sir Mendes. Please just allow me the small blessing of enjoying your desperate attempts to claw together a movie from the fever dream of nonsense I left for you. So, as you've probably surmised, when Q connected Silver's laptop to the MI6 mainframe, it uploaded I think it's called a worm, that hacked into the security systems, allowing Mr. Silver to hatch himself free from that big plastic cube and prance off into the tunnels beneath London. Bond is now in pursuit, playing catch-up, but don't worry, Bond has Q guiding him over the radio from his operation room, although for some reason Q is still using the virus-infected map that he found on Silver's laptop. Q, what are you f***ing doing? Do you not have your own map of London, Q? Use your own map. I mean, I expect this level of incompetence when it comes to real policemen, but when it comes to fiction, you really do have to raise the bar a little bit. Skyfall is nearly hit by a train here, as was Danny Craig, actually. This whole scene was supposed to be shot at 1/3 speed and then sped up, but I sabotaged the train, so it actually came at Dan full speed. No cigar, sadly, but it was worth it to hear the little squeaky noise Dan made when the train shot towards him. See, this was becoming the norm now. Little accidents on set every day, one scene at a time, one near miss at a time. A loose screw here, a faulty wire there. I could tell that I was wearing them down, and every day I was getting bolder, getting closer and closer to finishing the job. So we see Danny here, pushing his way through busy tunnels on the London Underground, oblivious to the fact that one of the extras behind him here is none other than the man whose life he'd ruined. Sneaking into the background of these scenes. Crazy that Danny didn't recognise me, but a few months living in a bin at Pinewood Studios had been quite slimming, I have to say. They were recycling a lot of the crowd throughout this sequence. So I'm going to keep popping up on screen, actually, throughout this whole bit. Oh, there I am. Inside my jacket, I had this little wooden knife that I'd been whittling at night. On the handle of the knife, I'd engraved this rudimentary picture of a Komodo dragon. And my plan was to stab Dan with this little knife, if I could get myself close enough. Then simply melt back into the background like a naughty little ghost, vanish into the tunnels, leaving Danny, if he survived, to dwell on the possible meaning of the image on the blade that had penetrated him so easily. Would he realise, I wondered? Would he connect the image to that day back in Macau when he had pocketed my winnings and then denied all knowledge of doing so? Would Dan recognise the dragon as a symbol of his own guilt, a terrible debt that was coming due? You are being hunted by an avenging angel, Daniel Craig. Do you think this is all in your mind, Dan? Or is this real? Anyway, I was able to manoeuvre myself quite close to Dan for a couple of these shots. However, ever since that flight back from Hashima Island, I regrettably smelt extremely potently of sandalwood and vanilla orchid. The flight case that I'd been locked in for 23 hours was fully permeated with the aroma from Daniel's luxury candles. A smell that then was permanently transferred to myself. I seemed to be surrounded by this thick cloud of candle stank at all times. And Dan, more than anyone, knew that smell intimately and would freak the fuck out whenever he got a whiff. I got the impression that when his candle tree had vanished in transit, Danny suspected an old-fashioned candle snatch had taken place, and that probably a crew member had been behind it. So any whiff of luxury candle, and Danny would immediately blow overtake and start sniffing people, and then I would have to shrink back out of the way, do a little smokescreen fart, if I could muster one. So in the end, the train scene's wrapped without me managing to stick Dan with a homemade knife, which was frustrating at the time. That said, the candle smell had provided its own form of psychological torture, so it was still a win for me. So Silver has now ingeniously disguised himself with a policeman's hat that in no way conceals his extremely distinctive bleached micro mullet, and yet Bond instantly loses him, despite being less than 2 meters behind him. It's actually quite easy, Bond. It's the policeman that looks like Javier Bardem. Now that the crowd scenes were over, I retreated back to Pinewood Studios, where the crew was preparing to shoot this public hearing scene. You can actually see I've been in the wide shot. The hearing scene took a very long time to film, and there weren't many opportunities for sabotage till the very end, so I'm mostly just there, crouched in the corner for about 14 days. Not much to do really, but entertain myself with outlandish, violent fantasies. I was quite insane by that point, I have to say. So, just to recap the absolute nonsense of Silver's plan here. Silver wanted to be captured. Silver also wanted Q to plug in his laptop. But not only that, it also seems that Silver knew that Bond was going to be pursuing him, and even knew exactly just how far behind him Bond was going to be, with a margin of error of less than a meter, because it turns out that Silver got one of his goons in advance to set up a bomb right here to blow a hole in the side of this crypt, a hole which seems specifically timed to derail a tube train in an adjacent tunnel and cause this derailed train to then careen down into the crypt below, precisely where Bond is standing, which really suggests that Silver made the encryption on his laptop deliberately easy to break, because Silver needed Bond to discover his secret plan. He wanted Bond to pursue him into the tunnels so that he could trigger the bomb to kill him with a derailed train. Silver, having created such a complicated ruse, a plan years in the making, deliberately exposes his plan to MI6 30 seconds after putting said plan into action, just so he can hopefully get a chance to kill Bond along the way. Even though revealing his plan puts all of London on high alert and the explosion reveals Silver's exact whereabouts. Silver has clearly meticulously planned his assassination attempt down to the smallest detail. It's just weird that he's planned it to be deliberately mediocre. Very frustrating for me, as the previous helmsman of the story, seeing these guys completely get over their skis here. Classic issue, seriously overcomplicating the bad guy's plan. However, I will say, I did find this clusterfuck quite instructive, particularly as someone trying to hatch my own dastardly plan to murder Daniel Craig. And I feel I brought that with me into my final confrontation with Daniel up in Scotland, which we will get to soon enough. Here's M being grilled in a tribunal about the many failures of MI6. You might think, seeing as this is MI6's last chance to justify its own independence, that M would really bring out the big guns here. She should be passing around the dossiers, sharing any unclassified win she can. She could still be honest. She can say, look, we have our problems, and I know we fucked up on Iraq, but I'm sorry, cunts, did you forget that we killed fucking Goldfinger? And we killed Thunderball? And we killed Octopussy? And the fucking goose one? The one with the goose in it? As I said, I don't remember the other movies in granular detail. Point is, there's a clear case here. But what does she do instead? She decides to read a poem. Not the time for a poem, M. You can't respond to accusations of administrative negligence with a poem. Just as you can't just decide to hold up a lovely painting of a horse. Is M just hoping that as soon as she starts reciting poetry, everyone in the room is just instantly going to switch their brains off and that she'll just win the argument by default? I imagine it was a blessed relief for the people attending this hearing when Javier Bardem finally burst into the room and starts shooting everyone. So what M read to the hearing was the final lines of the poem Ulysses by Alfred Lord Tennyson. It's a poem about an old hero who, having finally completed his wild adventure and made it home to his family and country, has now discovered, to his dismay, that he kind of hates the people here. Also, it turns out his family bore him to tears, and so Ulysses decides in the poem that he wants to get back out on the ocean again. He wants to go and have another adventure, despite now being old and infirm, which he acknowledges, but ultimately says, fuck it, what else am I going to do? So this is basically a poem about having a midlife crisis and wanting to dine out on past glories and die out on the waves rather than stop and acknowledge that anything has changed. Now, I kind of see how that makes sense for Bond as a character, but not necessarily the official line from MI6. Which does make me wonder if Judi Dench chose the poem herself as perhaps a way of hiding an ugly truth within a smokescreen of literary civility. Because this is exactly the kind of subversive Easter egg that I would expect Judy to hide. And I know this from chatting politics with Judy earlier on in the shoot. Judy is basically an anarcho-terrorist. In fact, I have it on very good authority that she only took the damehood because she thought she might use the ceremony to get a pop at the Queen. I think the plan was a poison-tipped brooch. Judy was going to skewer Her Majesty with it, but sadly, Judy missed her shot because she came up on her acid trip earlier than she was expecting, and so she had to excuse herself from the royal palace and walk off the high, and subsequently, Judy had to accept her damehood in the post. Anyway, Judy's a real one, and I feel pathetically guilty about nearly burning her alive in that Waterloo fire. Judy and I had crosswords sometimes, but she tolerated my buffoonery as well as she could. I think she was certainly sad when she heard I'd been killed. She attended my funeral and brought a lovely bouquet of wildflowers. At the funeral, she was actually sat right next to the giant urn that I was hiding in, and she seemed appropriately glum about the whole thing. And she stayed for the wake too, unlike Daniel Craig, who only made the briefest of appearances and did not wear a tie. See, even in death, Dan still could not let go of his disgust for me. How sad is that? I was so offended, I nearly leapt out of my urn and attacked him. But no, it was not the time. I had to wait till Dan was on his own. I would get my chance. soon enough.
Oh, and I suppose that's completely inconspicuous.
Get in.
So, we're entering the final act of the story now. It's been a long road. A lot of things have happened along the way. The good news is, you can pretty much forget now everything that has happened so far. All you need to know is that Silver's quote-unquote real plan has finally been revealed. Turns out Silver is trying to murder M. That's what he wants. That's all he wants. It's revenge, pure and simple. He just wants to kill his ex-boss, a 78-year-old woman. Which is harder than it looks, it seems. Still, despite his lack of success so far, MI6 are so completely rattled by Silver's assassination attempt, which was so complicated. So complicated, I think even Silver himself was baffled by it. But perhaps because of that complexity, MI6 have got so confused that they've decided to give Silver the benefit of the doubt, and now they think he's a genius. They just can't predict what Silver's going to do next. Which is the one thing that geniuses and idiots have in common, isn't it? So it is often hard to tell those two groups apart, at least to begin with. And I must say, as an idiot myself, I have successfully leaned into this misunderstanding many, many times over my career. It's really remarkable how many times I have done something so incompetent that the only possible explanation for the mistake is that I'm a visionary. So yes, Silver has them all so confused that they decide that the best way to protect M is to leave her completely isolated in the middle of nowhere with a single agent to look after her. They're scared of Silver's hacking abilities. So our hero Skyfall decides the best way to protect M is to go completely off-grid. They need to retreat to a simple land, a savage land, a place where no one has ever even seen a mobile phone, where most communication is done by tying parchment to a kestrel. A land where technology is feared, where they don't have plumbing, most of them. They just squat in a loch. It's easier in a kilt. I'm talking, of course, about the Scottish Highlands. Skyfall decides the perfect place to keep M safe is his family home, a huge crumbling house in the bottom of a valley, a place which can be attacked from all sides, 360 degrees, great location for a last stand. What? The house is called Skyfall as well? That doesn't make any sense. What use is having a secret spy codename if your secret spy codename is just the first line of your address? I think what's happened here is that they've confused intelligence agency codenames with personal confidential information. It's like me being a spy and choosing my national insurance number as my secret spy name. I don't know, I just think the baddies might crack that one, no? Classic Mendes, overcomplicating things, as usual. So, yes, the plan here, as I understand it, is to get the upper hand on Silver by using Scotland as a way to figuratively retreat back into the past. They want to stop Silver from weaponizing technology against them. Of course, this plan is going to immediately fall down when Silver turns up in a military helicopter armed with Stingray missiles. Seems they didn't think about Silver weaponizing weapons against them, but never mind. So the house we're looking at here is actually a set. It was custom built for this production. back down south at Pinewood Studios, I was rummaging through the production office one night, and I came across the plans for this building here. So I got the heads up early that this was going to be the stage for the finale. I also knew from the manifests the crew had already brought a ton of explosives with them to this location, which was extremely titillating information. Pyrophilia is for life, after all. There is no cure to being sexually beguiled by violent, fiery explosions. So, as soon as I saw the schematics for the finale that Sam Mendes was planning, I instantly knew this was the place where I would finally get my bloody, brutal revenge on Hollywood actor Daniel Craig. If I could kill him on camera, all the better. I still loved the legacy aspects of capturing the event on celluloid, but ultimately, as long as before Craig died, he knew that it was me behind it all, anything else was a bonus. As soon as I saw the schematics of this house, there was something about it that reminded me of a movie I made for TV back in my 20s. I think it was 1969. Did I forget to tell you how old I am? I was 63 when I shot Skyfall. I'm 77 now. Back in 1969, I did a TV movie of Macbeth with Patrick Troughton and Lulu, and the house we used for that production looked almost identical to this house here. And I suppose I liked the idea of Daniel Craig becoming my Macbeth, a figure doomed by his own vaulting ambition. And I was a kind of amalgam of both King Duncan and Banquo, because I was, both Macbeth's boss and his best friend, both of whom, of course, are murdered by his hand. Banquo, actually, in my 69 production, was played by Reg Varney from On the Buses. He was surprisingly adequate. Now, I thought, just like Banquo, it was time for me to return from the dead. A ghost returning to torment his killer. I mean, let's not split hairs here. Dan Craig forced me to fake my own death, so he was my killer. The comparison tracks. So my plan was simple. Hide beneath the floorboards of this house, wait for the right moment when I could get Craig alone, and then, when the moment was right, I was going to quickly cover my body, head to toe, in white emulsion, my skin, my clothes completely soaked, and then, seconds later, emerge, ghost-like, from a hole in the floor, a dripping white ghost. I would pause to let Craig take in the true horror of what he was seeing and the supernatural, spiritual ramifications of it all. And then I would swiftly decapitate him with a broadsword and vanish back into the floor. Don't worry, there's always at least one broadsword in these sets. There's always one on the wall, in case that's the bit you're bumping on. Trust me, I thought of everything. See, just like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't going to overcomplicate my plan. I was just going to keep things nice and simple. Just 1, impersonate a ghost. 2, take Daniel Craig's head off with a sword. That's it. 2-step plan. Nice and simple. So, while cast and crew were still in London shooting the final scenes of the film, I decided to hitchhike up to Glencoe so I could arrive before everybody else and familiarise myself with the set in advance. Dig myself whatever trenches beneath the house were required. So, by the time Daniel arrived, the house would already be fully primed for his demise. The house had just finished construction when I arrived, and it wasn't until the first time that I saw the house for real, only when I was standing in front of it and experiencing it in person, did I realise that it was the exact house from my vision. The hallucinatory episode that I had when I was on drugs, that I had been holding for Adele's witch doctor, who I hit with a go-kart at high speed. It was that house. I knew it immediately. I'd barely thought about that waking hallucination of mine. Since the night it happened, the whole thing had just evaporated like a dream. Until now. But now, it all came back to me. The ancient house. Seamen raining from the sky. And a darkness at the center of it all, waiting to consume me. It all came back. And I thought to myself, well, that certainly quashes any remaining doubts in my mind about what I'm about to do here. Because you feel a lot less bad about committing a terrible crime if that crime is already mystically woven into your cosmic destiny. On the day Daniel Craig finally arrived on set, I was already secreted away in my little dugout underneath the house. I had my paint and my sword, and I was very much in the thrall of psychosis, lusting for vengeance. Along with the arrival of the actors that day, there was also an entire minivan of stunt performers, all for Daniel Craig, all dressed in the same clobber as Danny. I think there were 7 stunt doubles in total. The finale, of course, had been scripted to push Skyfall to his limit. There were many dangerous or acrobatic or otherwise specialist actions required of the character, so clearly a decision had been made to spread those activities across as many personnel as possible. They had done an incredible job of finding stunt performers who really were close fits for Danny Craig. A couple had fatter faces, one had a neck tattoo. A lot of their eyes were slightly closer together. But on the whole, the overall impression was that Dan Craig had somehow stepped into a discount cloning machine and created 7 new, slightly brain-damaged versions of himself. From my spy hole in the floor, I clocked an acrobat Skyfall, a marksman Skyfall, a fireproof Skyfall, a falling Skyfall, a generic impact Skyfall, and a Craw McGraw Skyfall, who looked particularly cutty. The 7th stunt double, I realised, was Darwid, the stunt double that had been with us from the start of production. Darwid had actually been absent from production for some time. He left the film right after Macau because turns out his first novel had just won the Nike Prize. It's the most prestigious literary award in Poland. And he'd had to return home for the ceremony. But now he was finally back to finish what he started, and I'm sure everyone appreciated that. Seeing Darwid from my little hole in the floor, I was suddenly struck by a quite horrible thought. I wonder if you've also had this thought, whilst listening to this commentary. Seeing Darwid, I suddenly realised that it was very possible that back in the Macau casino, it might actually have been Darwid left holding my cashier's check when I was rushed to hospital. And that was why Daniel Craig told me he had no knowledge of the money later when I accosted him. Which, of course, meant that I had torpedoed my entire life, trying to get revenge on an innocent man. A man who, in actual fact, I had wronged more than he had wronged me. Also, seeing Darwid dislodge the buried memory of mine, I suddenly remembered back in hospital in Macau, a guy who looked a little bit like Darwid trying to visit me in my bed. But I took one look at him and had him ejected. Now I realise it was probably Darwid. He was just wearing his author clobber. He was, I suppose, already on his way to the airport to go and receive his literary award back in Poland. But seeing Darwid in a trilby and smoking pipe, I just assumed he was a pervert of some kind, trying to get my autograph. He probably just left a check for me at the hospital. He likely has no idea that I didn't get it back. Next thing he knows, I've been killed by a giant runaway catapult. Even if Darwid mentioned the check to someone else on the crew, I doubt they understood him. In Polish, Darwid has become the voice of his generation, but his English sounds like a but f***ing cistern refilling. So all of this suddenly hits me, and I'm thinking, my God, if this is true, then all this time, I have been boxing my own shadow. If true, then my only adversary all this time had been myself. All Danny Craig wanted was to finish this story. His grief with me was all strictly professional, and I could hardly begrudge that. Darwood, equally, a complete innocent. He had no understanding of the stakes of the story he was passing through. I mean, it's like reading Dostoevsky to a cat. Any hint of comprehension showed was purely coincidental. Neither of those men, I realized now, were responsible for putting me in this hole in the ground, this unmarked grave in Scotland. All I wanted was to crawl away and vanish into the mist to get as far away from this place as I could. I just felt so wretched and guilty and hollow with self-hatred. However, I could not leave my hiding place. Due to the day-to-night nature of this final set piece, the crew was filming on this location around the clock. All the anticipation stuff during the day, M and Bond and his groundskeeper prepping for the fight. Then come nightfall, switching over to the second unit for these highly technical action sequences when Silver's team of mercenaries attacked the house. And then, when the sun rose again, they would just switch back to the first team and pick up filming the anticipation scenes again. It's like we were all trapped in this 24-hour time loop. The same day, the same night, over and over and over. They were so far over budget, so far over their schedule, and so they just worked and worked and worked, and never rested. They never left the house alone, never gave me my opening to escape. I couldn't believe I'd been fooled into mistaking one Daniel Craig for another. I had come to Scotland seeking my Macbeth. Yet, I had found a comedy of errors. Weeks passed, with me trapped in my grave, until, having shot everything else, the crew were finally ready to blow up the house. Through my spy hole, I watched them bring in the explosives, crate by crate, and once the checks were complete and the fuses primed, the house was finally evacuated, ready for its final scene. I will say, I was tempted to stay and burn with the house and fulfill, at long last, that artistic vision of mine to conceal my own death within this picture. But then a voice in my head called out to me, the voice of Ulysses, as described by the poet Alfred Lord Tennyson. He called to me and said, "Come, Trevor, 'tis not too late to seek a newer world. Push off, Trevor, and, sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows, for your purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars." And so, hearing this in my head, I chose life and new adventure. As wretched a human as I was, I chose to go on. For all deserve to tell a long story. A story at least as long as the 2012 motion picture Skyfall, which is a very long story indeed. So I decided to escape. I only really had one play available to me, and so I made it. I quickly tipped my large tin of white paint over my body. I burst from my hiding place beneath the floor, and then I sprinted away from the house Did I have to be dressed as a ghost for this strategy? I wasn't sure, but I thought, well, it can't hurt. The crew had retreated to a safe distance, ready for the ensuing explosion. Luckily, I ran in the opposite direction. Regrettably, however, I did run straight into Daniel Craig's stunt doubles, who had been secretly playing a game of night frisbee directly behind the house. Sadly, these men were not afraid of ghosts. They immediately saw me for what I was, a 63-year-old, extremely malnourished man, covered in white emulsion paint, dragging a broadsword. Anyway, I find myself in this circle of men closing in on me, this ring of 6 Skyfalls, and before I can even get off a single spectral shriek, these men descend on me like animals and simply begin to pummel me into the ground. Before I know it, General Impact Skyfall and Fireproof Skyfall are holding me down, while Craw McGraw Skyfall giggles and kicks me in the back. Acrobat Skyfall and Falling Skyfall are fighting over my sword, while Marksman Skyfall hits me in the face over and over with the frisbee, taunting me. What are you doing here? What do you want? Darwin was not there. He was probably holed up somewhere writing the next great Polish novel of the 21st century. But still, 6 Skyfalls is more than enough trouble for one man. I remember looking up from the dirt at these strange, distorted Daniel Craigs leering over me in the dark. These men did not realize just how frail I was. They had no idea what this body of mine had been subjected to over the last 9 months. The drugs and the torture and the living in cases and bins and graves. Every single one of my bones was screaming in pain. And I thought to myself, these men are going to kill me. They may not mean to. All the same, I am about to die at their hands. And, that was very, very important information in my trial. And then it happened. The whole sky lit with fire. The house erupting into this golden infernal bloom. The Skyfalls and I were hidden from the cameras around the far side of the house. No one else on the crew knew we were even there, but we were close enough to the blast that the Skyfalls were knocked sideways by the shock. Everyone gets tossed into a heap, and I can feel the heat on my face as the sky ignites above me. And I feel the tightening in my groin, the sexual excitement of the blaze hitting me like an adrenaline shot to the heart. My whole body just exploding with energy. Next thing I know, I am back up on my feet. Once again, the broadsword is right there in my hand. But strangely, it now feels completely weightless. Look, I really do want to stress how little planning went into the following sequence of events. There was a tremendous amount of improvisation happening here. I was very much just following my instincts. Anyway, I stabbed one of the Skyfalls right in the penis. Right in there. After that, one of the Skyfalls managed to jump onto my back and instantly cut his own ear off. Not my fault. Don't jump onto the back of a man waving a sword around. I can hardly be held responsible for that one. Next, I remember, I think it was Fireproof Skyfall who managed to get the sword out of my hand and then get his hands around my throat. That one was a little trickier. I think I bit his nose off, and thankfully that seemed to do the trick. From then on, the 6 Skyfalls and I were very much in a full-blown skirmish, rolling around in the mud, punching and kicking each other. But these men, as strong as they were, they simply could not contain my ecstatic energy. All the while, going round and round in my head was that Tennyson poem, Ulysses screaming to me, "Keep going, Trevor. We can always keep going. It doesn't matter how old we are, how decrepit we've become. We must never accept our ending, Trevor. As Ulysses, so our empire, so James Bond, so you, Trevor Lang. It doesn't matter how far our glory days are behind us, if Britain is little more than a joke on the global stage. So what if our empire is dead, Trevor? We must keep going, keep pushing, not because of the greater good, but simply because it is all we know how to do. You must keep going, and going, and going. Yes, you are weak by time and fate, but you are strong in will. Strive, Trevor. Seek, find, and never yield." I remember one of the Skyfalls. I think it was General Impact Skyfall. I hope it was General Impact Skyfall. Managed to pin me to the ground, but the shock of accidentally touching my partner caused him to draw back just for a second, and in that moment, I grabbed his arm, leapt to my feet, and flung him up into a nearby tree. Now, this, I admit, utterly implausible act of strength upset the Craw McGraw Skyfall so much that he immediately turned and ran away across the field like a little bitch. And so I instinctively picked up my broadsword and flung the blade at the retreating Skyfall, which perfectly divided his arm from the rest of his body. What can I say? I just have a good eye when it comes to measuring distances. And I really have my cinematographer, Roger Deakins, to thank for that. So again, not exclusively my fault that I amputated a guy's arm from his body. Like everything in the movie business, it's all a group effort. After the arm incident, all the other Skyfalls seemed to make the collective decision to stay down on the floor. Apart from the one stuck in a tree, he stayed stuck in a tree. Nobody died, as my legal team stressed many times throughout my trial, but some of them were losing a significant amount of blood. It was quite a distasteful scene. Everything was black smoke now, embers raining from the sky. Out of the darkness then comes Daniel Craig himself, who, as you might imagine, was quite surprised to see me. So I said to him, "Don't worry, Daniel. It's not your fault. I don't hold you responsible for any of this." I thought that was as good a line as any to leave on. So, feeling like my job on the set of Skyfall was finally over, I turned away from Daniel and slowly walked off into the darkness of the valley, where I was immediately accosted by a police helicopter and about 20 armed policemen. Anyway, that's Skyfall. Not the best film I worked on, but also not the worst. By a long shot. Good God, I have worked on some really troubled productions in my time. Way worse than this. No, this was a cakewalk in comparison to some of them. I think everyone involved is pretty happy with how the film came out, and listen guys, credit where credit's due. I was an integral part of this motion picture, so you're welcome. Of course, at least some of the praise should fall to my peer, Sam Mendes, who did a fantastic job of polishing the thing off. So, Sam deserves his flowers too. I know Danny is proud of the film. I'm not entirely sure what Danny really thinks about me, though. I know what he said during the trial, but that, I feel, only captures one specific angle of our relationship. Perhaps we shall meet again one day. Who knows? Maybe on the film set. I have so many ideas for motion pictures. So many story ideas. I don't want to show my hand now. Not until I have financing, but I'll just give you 2 words as a little teaser. Dream heist. Never been done. Very original idea. Finally, to all my victims, I would just like to say, sorry. I am sorry. I hope you're doing okay. Sorry. And again, thanks to the Scottish Prison Service for allowing me to be here today in this studio to record this commentary. Also, thanks to my fellow inmate, Carl, for coming along with me today and providing the wonderful musical accompaniment, which I think added hugely to the drama of my story. Thanks, man. Cheers. And now I think there's nothing more for me to do but pull the pin on this smoke grenade here and escape into the ventilation system. Okay. Great. Okay, till next time.